So members of the public, if you haven't been here before, one of the officers will introduce every item. When they've finished, I will ask if anybody has any points of clarification. Then, if we have got public speakers, which we have to the items on the agenda tonight, they will be asked to come to the table and will speak for 3 minutes, and it's a very strict 3 minutes. And then if any members have got questions of clarification, they will be asked. And after that, we will be going to open debate. But before we start the meeting, I don't know if anybody of you are here for the item of 2A New Court Road, Topsham, because that has been withdrawn from the agenda for tonight's meeting and will be coming on the Planning Committee meeting next Monday. So unfortunately, if you're here for that, I am very sorry you haven't been told. Right, so let's go on with the agenda then. I'm not expecting any fire alarms this evening, so if the alarms do go off, if members of the public could make their way to the back of the room, and obviously councillors and officers will go out the door at this end. Thank you. Right, item number 1 is apologies. Howard, have we got any?
Councillor Amal was saying.
And is Councillor Sheldon? Right, okay. Thank you, Councillor Sutton. And new councillor isn't here yet, because he's got a family problem, hasn't he? Yes. Right, is everybody happy for me to sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of October?
Yes.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Can I remind members to declare any interests?
I've got interest in item 7, and I will withdraw for that item.
And because Councillor Williams is withdrawing from item number 7, I plan to slightly adjust the agenda so that we will do item number 5. We will then do 8, 9 and 10 before we do item 7, so that Councillor Williams doesn't have to sit outside for just the very few items that come after Hickling Cottage. So I hope everybody's happy with that.
I know. Thank you, Chair.
I have got my own back. She's going to do a site visit for us. We've got no items on the agenda tonight. Item 4 to exclude the press and the public. So we'll now start on the planning applications. Item number 5, the application for the land north of Honiton Road and west of Fitzroy Road, Exeter. I don't know which of the officers, I forgot to ask. It's Matt, is it?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This application is for a mixed-use development to provide town centre facilities comprising uses within classes A1 retail, classes A2 financial and professional services, class A3 cafes and restaurants, with associated drive-throughs, class A5 hot food takeaways, class D2 assembly and leisure, with associated means of access roads, service yards, car parking, infrastructure, public realm and landscaping. It's an outline application, members, and the only detailed part of it is access. This application is a resubmission of the application that was brought before you back in July last year. Just before we go through the slides, I have 3 late representations just to report to you that were received today. These are in addition to the 2 late letters of support as recorded on the additional information sheet. The first representation received today was from Network Rail, basically withdrawing their holding objection following further information that was provided to them by the developers. They have listed a number of issues that they would like us to consider adding further conditions on, and that's something that we would ask you to delegate to the City Development Manager should you be happy to approve the application. The second late representation received today was from Purple Investments GP Limited, who are the asset managers for the owners of Princess Hay Shopping Centre. Whilst Purple Investment GP Limited haven't objected to the application, they have raised a few concerns with it. They've reiterated that it is a large application for out-of-centre uses in an out-of-centre location. They have raised some concerns regarding market conditions for Exeter City Centre and the challenges and pressures facing retailers at the current time. They've also requested some tightening up of conditions. These are to make the no poaching condition, which is condition 45, an obligation within a Section 106 legal agreement instead of being dealt with by condition. They have suggested a condition effectively requiring the delivery of a large food store as part of the scheme as an early requirement, and they've requested tightening up the conditions in terms of the restrictions of goods to be sold to include additional goods other than restricting the sale of clothing, footwear and or fashion goods. And now these issues were raised previously, albeit rather late again, and were considered by officers and are not considered justified, considering that the application has been reviewed by our external retail consultant, who has concluded that the application is acceptable in terms of its impact on centres within the city. The final representation received today, which was at 5:07, was from a Miss Liz Spry, objecting to the application, simply stating that out-of-town centres take business away from town centres, which is an issue that has obviously already been dealt with previously and is in the report. I'll just take you through the slides. So I know members are very familiar with this site, so once again this is the site location plan outlined in red adjacent to Honiton Road. This is the latest Google Maps image of the proposal. This shows a new housing development in this slide showing being under construction to the north of the site. As members are probably aware, most of this housing has now been delivered and is occupied, so this is slightly out of date. Obviously to the north of that you can just see the edge of the Met Office as well, and obviously members are familiar with the character of the area, with the extensive employment uses to the south east and north east of the site, and residential to the west. This, despite the application being submitted in outline, this is a parameters plan that has been submitted by the developers to give members an idea of the likely layout of the application. Obviously the details of the layout and the scale of the buildings and the appearance and landscaping will subsequently be determined under reserved matters applications. This plan, though, gives an idea of what it will most likely look like. So to the west you have the larger block, which will comprise a mix of retail uses, selling both comparison and convenience goods. And to north, the mixed-use block, which will comprise A1, A2, A5 and D1 uses. So the A2 is to allow for a bank or another financial type facility to be provided, and the D1 use is to allow for a gym to be provided as well. The A5, as members are probably aware, covers hot food takeaways. To the south of the site, members can see the three individual A3 units. So those are to allow for restaurants and cafes. Two of the units are shown with drive-through facilities as well. It's probably worth pointing out that the developers have listened to past comments raised by officers and members and are showing additional public open space on this plan just to the north of the left-hand retail unit, alongside a cycle hire point. This is to add some placemaking to the scheme and to make it feel more like a mixed-use centre as opposed to a retail development. These plans are illustrative, and they just show how the individual blocks could be split. So this is block A. This is showing a large retail unit, which will most likely be the anchor unit for the scheme, which is likely to be, or could well be, occupied by a next home, and that's shown in yellow on the left, alongside two slightly smaller units. One is indicated on this plan as Marks and Spencer, so that would likely be a food retail unit. On this plan it's showing a Boots and another large food store in purple on the end. This is the illustrative floor plan for block B, so this is the mixed use block. It shows the D1 gym unit in dark blue on the end, alongside a bank and another A1 unit, and then three small units on the end with their entrances facing onto the side of the block, shown as a post office, a newsagent, and an A5 unit, which, as I say, would be a hot food takeaway. And these are the illustrative floor plans for the three A3 restaurant units. The applicants have also provided some 3D visualizations showing what the scheme is likely to look like. So this image shows the three A3 units to the south, with the provision of a public open space in the foreground with some seating and landscaping there. This illustration shows the end of one of those restaurant units with some external seating spilling out onto the public footway there, adding some life and vitality to the public realm. Just beyond that, you can also see the public open space with seating, and obviously in the background you can see block B, which is the mixed use block. And now this is looking south in the other direction, showing the large retail block on the right hand side and the edge of the mixed use block on the left. As I've mentioned, this is an application submitted an outline with all details reserved except access, so the developers have submitted a detailed access plan with the scheme, and this shows that access will be provided from Fitzroy Road excuse me, to the east of the site, with provision of the ability to provide an access to the north, joining up with the residential road in the residential development adjoining the site. Now, this will be a pedestrian stroke bike stroke bus only access point, so it wouldn't be used by other motor vehicles. And we have added a condition restricting it as such as part of the officer's report. As I've already stated, we have concluded as officers, and we've taken external expert retail advice that's concluded that the impacts of the scheme in terms of financial impacts on existing centres, so that's in this case the city centre and St Thomas district centre, are not considered significantly adverse. So in planning policy terms, those are issues that cannot be used as reasons for refusal. And indeed, when the Secretary of State determined an earlier application for a much larger scheme, which was around 17,000 square metres of floor space compared to this one, which is around 11,000 square metres, the Secretary of State concluded that the impacts of that scheme would not be significantly adverse. Now, one of the issues that has arisen on this application is the fact that the site is located within the strategic allocation area for Monkton and Hill Barton, and the policy requirement for the strategic allocation specifically refers to delivery of a local centre. and obviously it has been raised in the past by members whether the scale of this scheme meets the definition of a local centre. Now, as I've obviously written in the officer report, so members will be aware, it's probably worth pointing out that the core strategy was adopted in February 2012, and under national guidance, local planning authorities are required to review their policies every 5 years. So it's fair to say that the policy is slightly out of date and in need of review. It's worth bearing in mind that no local centre has been delivered within the strategic allocation to date. So that's obviously now 8 years since the policy was adopted. So we think that's a material consideration, and is why we consider that a flexible approach should be taken to consideration of this policy. As members will also recall from the officer's report, before the core strategy was adopted, the council had also approved, for development management purposes, a master plan for this area, and this master plan actually envisaged 2 centres for this area to provide facilities for the new residents of this area. So, stand up. So the 2 centres are actually indicated in black on this plan. So it's envisaging the expansion of a district centre near to the existing Sainsbury's store, as well as a much smaller local centre adjacent to the delivery of a new railway station. And obviously the application site is down here. It's probably worth bearing in mind that the master plan envisioned the site for a mix of employment and community facilities to serve the employment in the area, which is obviously what we feel this proposal is achieving, and is obviously clearly something that existing employers in the area consider as well. If members go to the additional information sheet and refer to the 2 letters of support, one being from Exeter Science Park, which stated that there is currently no sustainable centre for daily shopping close to junction 29 of the M5, and it is difficult for staff at Exeter Science Park to get into Exeter City Centre during the working day. Then it goes on to say the more exchange will support the needs of our ever-expanding community and will strengthen the long-term credentials of our business district. And critically, these much-needed high-quality retail and leisure facilities will help to attract investment, businesses and employees from Devon and beyond to the Science Park. And the second letter of support was from Southwest Comms, based in Soughton, which is a very large employer, also highlighting the benefits of the facilities to their employees and how difficult it is for their employees to make it into the city centre during their lunch breaks. And this image to the left is obviously just a diagram highlighting where those centres were envisaged, and we've included on the right hand side the actual phasing of the master plan, and what the master plan envisaged was that both of those centres would have been delivered by the end of 2018, but clearly we are now into 2020 with no such centres or facilities being provided. Which brings us back to this proposal and the mix of uses that are on offer. They include, as I say, a mix of Class A1 shops, which, if you refer to the conditions at the end of the report and the retail controls that we as officers have negotiated with the developers, include things such as a small to medium-sized food store, as well as a pharmacy, and that sort of thing. And as I say, we're not talking about just comparison goods retail here in terms of an out centre retail park. This proposal will deliver an A2 unit, as well as food retail and a gym as well. Excuse me. And bearing in mind that the master plan hasn't actually been delivered as envisaged, it's probably worth looking at the spatial distribution of existing centres that have developed over time in Exeter. And as can clearly be seen from this map, they are based along the arterial roads leading to the city centre, which is to be expected because that's where the passing trade and people travel. And as you can see, a number of centres exist leading out of town to the northeast, whereas there is a bit of a gap in terms of provision in this part of the city. And we feel as officers that it is a logical place to deliver a mixed-use hub to support the existing residential that has already been developed, and obviously the new residential that is under construction and will be delivered in the future, and obviously the extensive business community in this area as well. Members will recall from the officer report that we've made reference to the National Design Guide that was published in October 2019. This is a new material consideration that wasn't obviously in existence when the application was considered back in the summer. Now this has the same degree of weight as the NPPF, and it's really been published to highlight the importance of good design as part of new development, and it includes as part of the important principles of what good design is as the delivery of a mix of uses. So it's probably worth pointing out that it states that sustainable places, which is obviously what we're aiming to deliver in Exeter, include a mix of uses that support everyday activities, including to live, work and play. And obviously below, the well-designed places have a mix of uses including local services and facilities to support daily life. Now, it's fair to say that this is the only scheme that has been promoted in this area that will achieve delivery of those mixed of uses that will support the new residential development being constructed in this part of the city. And it's also fair to say that it's unlikely, if this application is turned down, that any other such proposals will come forward for this area, which will mean that residents and employees needing to travel further, most likely by car, rather than having the opportunity to walk or cycle to this proposed scheme, which will act as a mixed-use hub for the area. So we turn to the recommendation. As officers recommended back in the summer, we are recommending approval subject to quite a few conditions. Obviously a lot of those deal with technical issues that have been recommended to us by the various statutory and non-statutory consultees, as well as a number of the retail controls to ensure that the scheme is controlled and does what it says on the tin and functions as a mixed-use centre as opposed to a retail park. Now, members will note that the application that was before you in the summer had 40 recommended conditions, whereas this application now has 45. And now 3 of those conditions have come from Devon County Council's flood risk team, and they've asked for some further conditions to deal with technical drainage issues. Another new condition is that our environmental health officers have asked for a contaminated land condition, just to ensure when development takes place there's no contaminated material, and if there is, that it's dealt with sustainably. The other new condition to highlight is a condition for, well, as it's written in the report, a co-bikes facility. Now this follows negotiations between the developers and ourselves and the environmental health officers over what things can be done to mitigate any harm to air quality in the area. So members will recall last time the officers were satisfied with the level of mitigation being proposed, but members still had some concerns. So condition 7 now does require the delivery, as it's written in the report, a co-bikes facility, although in the additional information sheet we've changed that to an electric cycle hire facility. It's positive that the developers have been in discussions with co-bikes about delivery of that service, so that has helped to satisfy ourselves and the environmental health team that the proposal will provide a very good level of mitigation in terms of any impacts on air quality. Lastly, condition 6 has been amended just slightly. Before it was requiring a minimum of 40 electric charging points for electric vehicles as part of the proposals, and the developers have offered to provide 45 electric charging points now. So that is also a slight difference from where we were back in the summer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Have any members got any points of clarification? Councillor Henson.
There's several things that I would like to ask Matt about, please, Madam Chairman. If indeed we are being, if we don't approve this, we're not in trouble, but the point is that's what you're asking us to do. But if in the change of PPF for design, and I felt that design fell short of what is expected, and bearing in mind that it's going to be surrounded by a new property and new development, and continue to do so right up through on the Hullerton Road, even past the M5 eventually. This is going to be there for a long time, and I felt the design that you were showing us was very industrial rather than welcoming, if you're going to look at it as a local area for people to come and welcome to come and shop. And I felt that it could have been a little bit more as I say, welcoming in design. I mean, Tesco's, we fell over ourselves making sure that Tesco's was right in the area of the shopping area, such as where they sell retail. And I felt that this didn't. Now, though they're putting in the banks and things like that, can I go back to the first, either the first...
Councillor Henson, have you got a point of clarification?
Yes, I do, because it's there's several things here, Madam.
It's an outline application.
Yeah, I know it's an outline, but I hope I'm allowed to explain on this. Can we go back to the main plan, Matt, please, where just at the start? Where that one. Up in the left-hand corner there, where you've got a circle on the, is it block A, the big block, blue block? That seems to be a turning area. Now my concern is there that you've got, though it's outlined, you've got property on the other side of the fence. On this side you have my area, which is on the railway line. Now all that is going, if that is a noise element that is going to disturb the residents of all night, you're right on top of built up area, and that's my concern, and that's what I'm getting at, Madam Chairman. If at this stage I'm talking about design and where vehicles are going to, because this is the very place that you've got to talk about, is when it comes up for outline. is the worry of that noise element of delivering on night deliveries, because that is a big building there. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, that's sure. It's a fair point, and quite clearly, as Madam Chair has pointed out, the application is submitted an outline. So ultimately, the details of layout, including where the buildings go and the service yard and the roads and everything else, will be formally determined at a later date under reserve matters applications. But clearly, this plan did form part of this application, and as is normal, we consulted our environmental health team, whose job it is to ensure that new development doesn't cause harm to residential amenity in the area. So obviously they haven't objected, albeit that's on the back of a number of conditions that they've recommended and that we in the planning team have included as part of the recommendation. So these include things like the provision of an acoustic fence along that boundary, as well as new soft landscaping to soften the appearance of that. In addition, we have a condition that restricts delivery hours, so there should be no deliveries to the site or loading or unloading of delivery vehicles between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 p.m. So effectively at 6 a.m. Apologies. And slightly more technical condition about the actual noise that will be produced. So I would suggest to yourself, Councillor Henson, that these issues have been considered, and we as professionals feel that they are acceptable for this application. But obviously, there will be the opportunity to improve the layout if we consider that's important when we get to the reserve matters stage. Well, the design, as I say, because it's submitted an outline, the detailed design issues will come back at reserve matters stage, and obviously we would encourage the developers, being that it's a major development, to submit their proposals to the local design review panel, which is obviously what we normally do for big schemes. The design points that we've highlighted in the presentation refer to the mix of uses. So it's kind of standard practice that, as well as things like good architecture and good landscaping and good connections and things like that, that the actual mix of uses is good as well. So that's the design point that we were highlighting. That comes down to the provision of different types of floor space in the scheme. So that element will be secured as part of this application. In terms of where it sits and where it goes and how big it is and those sorts of issues, we'll look at that again when reserve matters applications are submitted.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. If I recall from our previous decision on this, the dispute or disagreement was in regard to the initial designation as a local community centre or a hub that we wish to develop, as against our view that on the whole this was a traditional retail park, which didn't meet what we believed to be our criteria of understanding what a local community centre was or is. You're saying in regard to this that you now feel this meets or some way goes towards meeting our community centre aspirations. I think particularly you emphasise the idea of the gym facilities there. What else do we really need in this to actually make it look and feel like a community centre? Because to me it still feels like an out-of-town retail park.
Well, once again, obviously I would remind Councillor Mitchell that this is an outline application, so in terms of things that you or I consider make a local centre in terms of design issues are things that will come back for consideration of this committee at a later date. But in terms of the uses that are going to be secured, I mean, you have to ask yourself what do you consider makes a local centre. We as officers feel that there should be a certain amount of convenience retail floor space, which is what we've secured, quite simply so that if you're living in one of the nearby new houses that have been built, you have a centre nearby that you can walk to buy a loaf of bread or a pint of milk or a newspaper, which otherwise isn't available nearby. It is what it is. It isn't a 100% retail park. It isn't applying for 100% comparison goods retail, as is typical with an outer centre retail park. It is going to deliver a mix of uses. So it's quite simply, by that definition, it isn't going to be an outer centre retail park. And obviously those other uses include such things as a bank, the gym, and a chemist. So, and that chemist could well include a 24-hour pharmacy, which I know from personal experience can be very useful when you have little kids that get sick late at night and you need somewhere to go when everywhere is closed. So, as I say, if it was an outer centre retail park, you'd be looking at it and it would be applying for 100% comparison retail goods normally. And if you think about our existing standard retail parks, they more or less fit that description. Here, if we go back to the list, obviously it does include A1 retail space, but as I said, a significant proportion of that will be for the sale of convenience goods, that's basically food goods, but we're also having restaurants and cafes, a gym, pharmacy, a bank, and so on. So it's not a typical retail park, if you see what I mean.
Thank you. If there's no other points of clarification. Oh, sorry, Councillor Sheldon.
Playing catch up. Can I just clarify? I'm waiting through the conditions, just double checking I haven't missed it. But there's conditions about the electric bike facility has to be fully implemented before any unit can be occupied. It mentions that they're going to provide a new bus.
Yeah, that's covered by condition 9, Councillor Sheldon.
Got it now.
Okay, Councillor Sharp. Right, we now have a supporter on this application. Mr. Martin Ridgway, if you would like to come to the table. And you have just 3 minutes, Mr. Ridgway, to make your statement when you're comfortable. If you press the button to the right at the front, it should come on.
Okay. Chair, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Martin Ridgway, Group Managing Director of Consolidated Property Group, the applicants for More Exchange. I've got no intention of going through the details and benefits of the application, which are already well known and are clearly laid out in the officer's report in front of you. However, I would like to make a few points. The first point I'd like to make is that we have listened to officers and amended the scheme and taken a positive and proactive approach. The floor area has been reduced and the range of uses improved to include a chemist, food stall, gym, bank, restaurants and a newsagent. The design of the scheme has been refined in consultation with your officers and potentially sets a new benchmark for how centres should promote sustainable development and access for local residents, workers and visitors. With climate change very much in everyone's mind, it is essential that any such new development here maximises all opportunities to reduce shopping travel miles, minimise adverse air quality, deliver a true eco-friendly development and ensure good accessibility for all. More Exchange meets these challenges head-on and furthermore will meet the needs of the existing and growing number of residents along with the wider business community, allowing many thousands of people to walk to the site each day to do their daily shopping. The importance of the location cannot be underestimated. The site neighbours two of Exeter's largest employers, the Met Office and Devon and Cornwall Police, who between them employ nearly 3,500 staff. At present, facilities are limited and people are forced into their cars or to the internet. The growth in East Exeter and the strength and quality of the businesses that are now based there is a huge success story for the city as a whole. Accompanying that growth is the clear requirement for a new services hub. and Moor Exchange is the preferred location, and indeed goes some way to meet the council's own master plan objectives. The scheme is designed to high quality BREEAM excellent standard and will include a green wall. It will also connect 4 new pedestrian cycle links to the site, reduced from the previous applications. The number of electric vehicle charging points has been increased to 45. A new bus link only connection into the adjoining residential development is also provided. Other highway improvements include widening of Honiton Road for a bus stop relocation and a new two-can crossing. And we're also working with co-bikes to add more exchange to its East Exeter network. These sustainability benefits are vital factors in today's climate and will make more exchange one of the most sustainable such developments in the country. A best-in-class development.
Thank you, Mr. Ridgway. Has anybody got any points of questions? Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst we're only dealing with outline permission here, at the same time we've got have to have an overall vision of what the end product is going to be look like. And you've amply described what it would be with this mixture of uses, including a bank, a chemist, and a range of restaurants and drive-throughs, etc. And that you should be able to complete your daily shopping at this by one visit to the centre. What guarantee have we got as planners that any of that will be actually delivered and you won't be coming back for something else? Because you cannot let these sites, as you've said.
I think it's important to stress and to pick up what Matt mentioned. This is an outline application, but strictly controlled by background. We've done what we can. We do have strong interest from operators for all the uses that we've been described. So I think we can develop a site with those uses. And indeed, the whole nature of the scheme is predicated on a mix of uses, a bit of everything, if you like.
Did I hear correctly that you said there was going to be a green wall?
Yes.
I haven't been able to find that in the submission here, so I just wondered where it was written and that it would definitely happen.
Well, we'd be happy to accept a condition obliging us to provide a green wall. We've just built one in our scheme in Bicester, and it's gone down very well, which is why we've incorporated it here. Obviously, behind the scenes, we are developing our design in conjunction with operators. We're clearly missing that all-important ingredient being a planning permission.
I'd be very happy that we actually included that as an additional condition.
Just to advise members, and as I know it's been repeated, the application is an outline, so matters of appearance which cover architecture and landscaping, the details where we would expect to push for things like green walls don't come under this application tonight, but certainly when we come to negotiating with the developers those reserved matters, we will clearly encourage things such as green walls and other biodiversity enhancements as part of the detailed design.
I think my concern is that if it's sort of not included in the paperwork we've got this evening, or it's buried, it could just be lost. So it'd be quite nice to have that minuted, that we would be looking out for that. If that's okay.
We can certainly add an informative to any planning permission granted encouraging biodiversity enhancement as part of the scheme, including things like green walls and those sorts of things.
Councillor Henson, you had a question.
Yes, there is a question. Thank you. Mr. Ridgway, there was a reduction on parking. How much, I should know, but I couldn't pick up the numbers. The reduction of numbers on parking, did you feel that is a good thing or a bad thing? Can I ask you that? Is it fine?
Well, inevitably the operators, whether they be retail, food store, bank, whatever, they will require some car parking. But there's been a lot of research undertaken on car parking numbers. So we've been able to work proactively with officers and reduce the number of car parking spaces, and indeed we've also reduced the floor area of the scheme.
You also said that you had 45 restrictions put on you. But are you saying...
They weren't put on us, they were negotiated.
Negotiated. Do you feel that was a disadvantage?
I suppose from a developer's point of view it is a disadvantage. We're hamstrung, if you like, by conditions. Nobody wants lots of conditions, but I mean in this case they're perfectly reasonable.
Could I ask, is there anything in particular that you would rather have not seen there? No, I think that's planning.
That's relevant. I'm sorry, Councillor Henson.
No, it's relevant.
Councillor Henson, please, I am the chair of this meeting and I don't think that is relevant.
I would just say that we're very happy with the conditions that have been negotiated, and they're very strict, and as it should be.
Thank you, Mr. Ridgway. I would like to ask you a question from the chair. We're seeing all over the place that doctors' surgeries are struggling because of the numbers of people, and people can't get appointments, people can't get to doctor's surgeries. Have you got any plans to put a health centre of any sort in on the site?
We haven't been approached by any health centre operators, but if there was a requirement for health centre, we would certainly have a look at that. It's we want people to visit the scheme, and for it to be successful. And to do that now, you can't just build a big retail park. It has to have a mix of uses. It has to be sustainable. The only way it can be sustainable is by offering day-to-day provision that people actually want.
Thank you, Mr. Ridgway. If there are no other questions to you, thank you very much. If you could switch your microphone off, that would help. That's it. Thank you very much. Right, members, we'll open this up to debate now. Who would like to start off? Councillor Fold.
Thank you, Chair. It's well known that there's been opposition over a number of years to out-of-town retail parks per se, perhaps for two major reasons. One, the potential bleeding of tens of millions of pounds away from the city centre economy. But secondly, the inability of developers to actually meet the definition of what a local hub is. And I was delighted a few months ago when one of the officers actually read out from the handbook the definition of a local hub. And the sorts of things that developers have been putting forward to us have not represented that for a moment. So I'm actually pleased with this application because it shows that these developers have not only listened but have liaised as well. And I'm pleased that South West Comms and Exeter Science Park are supportive of the application. I'm also pleased that British Rail have withdrawn their objection, and that Purple Investment had no objection as such, albeit that they have reservations. More importantly, I'm pleased that the developers have listened, and things like public open space, cycle hire points, post office, newsagent, 45 electric charging points, chemists, gyms, we're starting to see something that represents more of what we might expect from a local hub. So in terms of a preferred location, this to me is starting to tick the boxes, and I would be supportive of this application in its current state. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Foles. Councillor Branston.
The one issue that's always, that didn't sound right, that has always concerned me is the traffic in Evertree Road. I think Evertree Road and Topsham Road are probably the two biggest routes into the centre, and I think that this would eliminate that if it wasn't necessary for people to come in, so I would support this application.
Thank you, Councillor Branston. Councillor Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There's two or three things that I still am concerned about. Seeing that there is 32 this Honiton Road per day, the problem of rises still is going to be in existence. Is the roundabout at Sidmouth Road, come Honiton Road, come my end. I can't think of the road now. by which case that roundabout going around on that road is appalling. How there isn't more accidents on that, and that's just on the side of this new development. And I do feel we could have pressed for some money for highways to improve that, with the approval of highways. And it's one of my sad things that this is going to go on without improvement within that area, and yet we're going to have a retail park here, mixed use. And the only concern I have is the loss of business within the city centre that's it's going to cause, and it's going to happen. But equally, there is those who live near there who's going to be delighted with it because it's going to be their local, and they're not going to have to go so far to get their go to the bank, if God willing there is a bank there, or whatever there is extra that's going to go there. I shall be waiting with bated breath to see. The thing is with the cut, that while I questioned Mr. Ridgway on the cut back on, and I know it's on officers' advice, is parking is that it is in an area that is very busy, with a busy hotel, with a restaurant there at Brewer's Restaurant. It gets very busy at certain times and whatever. And if indeed there is a cause of backup on Honiton Road, I don't know how you're going to control that, because people are going to be backing up trying to get into this retail car park. And that I feel might happen. If you haven't got sufficient car parking, people will use their cars. There is, you try to say and pretend that they won't, but people do. And this does concern me on one of our major roads going out to the M5, and it is a major road. But my concerns are that for the area, I'm not against this proposal, to be perfectly honest, because B&Q, which is further down, is going to already got planning permission as it exists. All they have to do is to renew the license or whatever they do and ask for planning on their retail out at B&Q. Then there is another one further down, wanting a retail also hubs. My mind is boggling at the fact that the increase on 32,000, how much more Honiton Road can take. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Bialik.
Thank you, Chair. We had the situation on the last occasion. I asked the question what had changed, because previously I voted against. It was made clear to me what the changes were. I am happy with this situation, and even more relieved in view of what Councillor Henson said, because there were some concerns about whether or not from Councillor Mitchell's they would find any businesses to go into these. Well, apparently we're going to be inundated with cars and inundated with people going there, so quite clearly I think there'll be quite a lot of businesses choosing to go there. Look, I've spent a lot of time in and around that area, and people talking to me, and they have been quite perplexed as to why this hasn't come about before. A district centre, we tried, that hasn't come off, and that could be all about scale. This is obviously a scale, it's got something that is going to going to bring about, and I think it's much needed in the area that people want. We've had the issues of the air quality being addressed. That's been addressed, and there's been a lot of, I won't quite say scaremongering, although I've just said it, but there has been some concerns raised, which I believe, whereas there are some issues, I don't think this is going to impact even more so than what people are saying. The transport issues has been discussed. Councillor Sheldon brought some points home about that, and I think that's important. But I think we've got to agree this. I'm going to support it. I think it's much needed, and as Councillor Henson said, people in the area will want it and see it, so let's do something for the people in the area.
Thank you, Councillor Bryant. Councillor Sheldon.
Thank you. So, sorry to be the dissenting voice. The impact on air quality, page 30, item 4, environmental health actually say that there will be a moderate impact at 2 locations. It's going to make the air quality worse on a route that already has unacceptable air quality. 5 more electric car charging points, electric bicycles, and that takes me to page 34, item 9. It talks about a bus route, it doesn't talk about a bus service. They put their little bit of bus lane in, put the concrete barriers on, and in 10 years' time there might never have been a single bus that's used it. Nothing in these conditions that I can see that's going to guarantee there will be a bus service to that site. If Stagecoach say, we've looked at it, it's not commercially viable, we're not going to do it, there won't be one. And they'll say, give us some money and we'll do it. County Council say, we're not going to give you money and we won't get a bus service. And so I'm really concerned there's nothing in here that's going to make that happen. We'll put a bit of tarmac down the green screen, but it's not going to guarantee that there's a service running. And if I'm going to accept the extra traffic it's going to generate, which can make air quality worse, then mitigation has to happen, not just should happen.
Thank you, Councillor Sheldon. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. I find this quite interesting, some of these discussions, because I don't think they go quite far-reaching enough. Now, for reasons that many of you will be familiar with, I have spent several hours recently walking up and down Myrtlebury Way and talking to residents. They are absolutely astounded that there are no facilities, and what the residents of Myrtlebury Way and the other roads on this new estate do is they drive to Sainsbury's. That's what they do. Right? So if we build, or allow to be built, something to the southern end of this estate, then all of those residents will have some facilities that they can use without having to get into their cars and drive down to Sainsbury's. Then again, if you look at the depositions we've had from South West Comms and other industrial concerns to the east of the city, again, a facility here will prevent employees from either driving out to, I don't know, Honiton, Cranbrook, Ottery St Mary to the east, or into the city centre, or Heavitree to the west. It will prevent them doing that. So my perception is that it provides a service for people. I've spent some time talking to officers, and in particular the Chief Executive, who is an ex-town planner, and we've discussed, and it's been demonstrated to me, that the impact on the town centre is minimal at best, because I've taken the time, trouble and effort and energy to talk to people about that. Yes, there is absolutely nothing to force Stagecoach or anybody else to run a bus service through there. They just happen to run one as it stands up Hillbarton Road currently as we speak, 50 yards to the north, and I would be absolutely astounded if they didn't choose to run it through a housing estate where there was more traffic. It would surprise me immensely, but hey, they may not choose to take that commercial opportunity. I think I voted against this the first time it came here. I voted for it the second time it's come here, and I can tell you that my residents in Myrtlebury Way and on that estate will be only too pleased to have the opportunity to buy a loaf of bread and a bottle of milk by walking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To me, the crux issue relates to our initial planning designation there of local district centres or whatever, and that was the grounds for my voting against, because I felt it was a traditional retail park. Clearly the developer has moved and the pattern of the site has changed, but I think it's worth pointing out we've still got 80% A1 shops on it, which could well be for local use, etc. But for example, we talk of Next Home, etc. Next Home is going to attract traffic from a wider area than the local community, so there is going to be some inward generation of traffic along there. And what we've got to question, I'm questioning myself, is that balance right, and am I willing to accept that as meeting what we believe to be our initial, or whatever view is of what a district centre is, and we have to get, is this the closest we're going to get to it? and are the benefits outweighing the disadvantages? And I'm coming clearly to the view that I'll be supporting this application.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I voted against this application last time, and one of my main concerns was on the air quality. It was also on the fact of town centre. However, I am minded to support it this time because of, I think, the need for local convenience stores has been expressed very clearly for the local residents and those that work in the vicinity. As for the air quality, which Councillor Sheldon sort of described so eloquently, I would say there are ways we can address this, obviously at a later stage, and it's not necessarily through the planning stages though. We've got the green wall, that would do something, but there are also other things, not just public transport. If we had, for example, electric bikes in other locations like the police headquarters, like South West Commons, the Science Park, because we actually need people to encourage those people to actually use those bikes to come in, and having them actually in this particular development itself, you think, well, you've got to be there to actually use them to go out. So, you know, you need them both ends. So there's also having free shuttle buses that employers could consider putting on. So there's all sorts of ways that we could try and reduce the use of cars to this particular site, and that's something that we need to be encouraging employers and also addressing in the later planning stages.
Does anybody else wish to speak on this item? No? I mean, this has been before us at least twice before, and each time it gets a little bit better. I think we should go to the vote on this one now, but I need a proposer and a seconder to support the application. So Councillor Bialik is proposing it, Councillor Branson is seconding it. Those in favour, please show.
8 in favour.
Those against?
2.
Right, that is carried then. Thank you, members. We now go to item number 8 on the agenda. Andy.
No questions notified, Chair.
Item number 9.
Bear with me while I catch up with you. So this is the appeals report. Large number of decisions since we last met, 7 in total, 5 of which were dismissed and only 2 allowed. I think the written report gives full details of the individual decisions, so I won't go into them in any detail, save for perhaps referring to the item on page 114 and the allowed appeal at 4244 Buller Road, Exeter. There's a slightly atypical within community use. It was our view that the marketing exercise had been only carried out on a limited basis, only for 6 weeks, and that it should be marketed for a longer period to truly demonstrate that there was no potential community use for it. Notwithstanding that, the inspector took the different view that the property had been marketed appropriately, and in coming to his decision to allow the appeal, he was also cognizant of the fact that there are other community facilities within a 1 kilometre radius of this site, which he felt in itself gave some weight to the appellant's argument that there would be no reasonable taker for this building. On the next page, Chair, it refers to new appeals, and in the way in which sometimes news gets overtaken by events. The first one on the list there, Beach Hill House. This was the second scheme for student accommodation, which this committee refused, I think, only 2 months ago. An appeal was submitted, and because there was already the existing appeal in for the previously refused scheme, if you recall, there was a larger scheme which was refused under delegated powers earlier.
Both were considered at an informal hearing shortly before Christmas. So we will next month bring the full detailed report on both appeals. But to cut to the chase, the larger scheme appeal was dismissed, but the application referred to on page 115, which was the more recent, slightly reduced scheme, was actually allowed by the inspectorate, who didn't accept the council's arguments that there was an unacceptable impact on amenity and that the use would lead to community imbalance. So planning permission has now been granted for that development. But as I say, we will bring a more detailed report outlining the inspector's reasoning when we come back to you for the February committee. And so just to finish by pointing out two further lodged appeals at Argyle Road and New Court Road. Thank you, Chair.
Any idea what you've been talking about?
If you remember, at the beginning of the meeting, Councillor Henson, I said that we were going to
I haven't
slightly...
got 119.
No, I haven't on mine either.
No, 115 is what yeah, yes.
No, it's actually
97 on the paper copies, it's 97 it ends.
So, my and Councillor Henson, you're not the first person to say I haven't the faintest idea what you're talking about. So I'm not at all offended. I seem to have a differently numbered agenda to everybody sat around.
Yes, I end on 97.
I end at 115.
19, yes.
Right, mine goes all the way up to 116, so I don't know what I've done to deserve the extra reading. So if you look on 97, that should cover it. And as I say, we will bring the full report on the two Beach Hill House appeals, which I think are the most notable ones at the February meeting.
No item, I know you told us to begin with it. That item 5 on that, is that to be discussed tonight? You seem to have lost it completely.
No, that was just information.
Oh, was it?
Yes, we have that. We had it.
That was information for you.
Yes, that's right.
Have you sorted yourself out now?
Yes, yeah.
No, we're all up. Stop.
We started there.
Yeah.
The
ones that are
Two, we've got Warner. The officer's copy.
Right, okay. Right, are we all happy with that now? Right, item number 10 is the site. Right, we can now go back, because as Councillor Williams has declared an interest on item number 7, we will now go back to Clifton Cottage, Tableford, and I think that is Roger.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to a proposal to change the use of a relatively recently built residential annex into a separate unit of residential accommodation. The location is, you can see in the centre of that plan there, is Hickling Cottage, and effectively replaced the garage you see in the foreground, and that's the same view taken rather more recently. The development you see there was approved in 2017 as a replacement outbuilding, and it's now proposed to use it as a separate residential dwelling. It's another relatively recent photograph showing looking from the other direction, so looking towards the way out back onto New North Road. I've got some photos here of showing what it looks like inside. That's the upstairs. I've got some floor plans as well in a minute, but this is the upstairs of the residential unit, or the annex as it is at the moment, with showing it's got a bed space and a kitchen living space. There's another one, kitchen, and again, and showing door to an outside amenity space area, which is this, or that's part of it. This is the downstairs of the building, which is currently a workshop, although if this is approved, it could well be used as a bedroom, and it's anticipated if that's the case, then the area upstairs currently used as a bedroom would become a larger living area. So there's the floor plans, that's the ground floor with the workshop or bedroom, and also there's a bathroom WC down there, and above it a bedroom, living area, a living dining area, kitchen and a bathroom, and access to the outside garden area. There have been 13 objections to the application for the reasons set out in the report. The main consideration is whether the use of a separate dwelling rather than an annex to a dwelling is acceptable. And you'll see from the reasons set out in the observations of the report that no specific planning policy reasons to refuse this application have been identified. It's considered that the standard of living accommodation for the occupants and the remaining Hickling cottage would be acceptable, and by and large meet our standards, and so approval is recommended. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Roger. Councillor Henson, you wish to ask some questions?
Yes, please. What has changed, can I ask? This came before us a long time ago. I remember this coming with Councillor Price. Yeah. By which case, this seems to be nothing changed to why we refused it last time. And I'm just asking, why are we looking at it as an annex rather than as a build, when we should have been looking at it as, it's exactly the same as more or less as was before.
The application that came in before was for a residential annex, or an annex, a replacement outbuilding, and we refused one, and then we approved another one. And this is an application to change that annex to a separate dwelling. We've never had an application for a separate dwelling on this site before, so that's what the difference is.
Any other questions to the officers? I now have an objector, Dr. Judith Proud. If you would like to come to the table, please, Dr. Proud. And you have 3 minutes to make your points when you're comfortable.
Good evening. As a local JP for the past 16 years, I'm more used to being on your side of the decision-making process than this, but I hope to be a worthy advocate for the many residents of Taddyford Estate Conservation Area who I represent today. The 3 headings under which I would like to address you are as follows. First, the inappropriacy of new builds in the Taddyford Estate Conservation Area. Secondly, Mr. Cushing's attempt to unfairly manipulate the legitimate planning process. And thirdly, the potential consequences of his proposal. These headings represent a summary of the many letters of objection you've received and a clear list of objective reasons for rejection. Firstly, the inappropriacy of new builds in the Taddyford Estate Conservation Area. I've lived in Taddyford Estate for 37 years. Conservation status was only gained relatively recently in those terms, but in all the time I've been there have been no new builds. Why? Because Taddyford is already developed to capacity. Any new build would be short on space, both internally and externally, and would destroy the harmony of the landscape and the extensive mature planting of shrubs and trees. This probably explains why Mr. Cushing did not apply to build a new independent dwelling from the outset. I'm sure that he would have been advised that such an application would be likely to be rejected. So this leads to my second point. The residents would argue that having it in mind from the outset to build an independent dwelling, Mr. Cushing then set out deliberately to attempt to achieve his intentions through the attempted subversion of the planning process. Events would seem to validate our concerns. Let it be clear that even considering it as a replacement outbuilding, there were many concerns by residents. The scale of the project compared to the footprint of the small single garage it was to replace, the amenities provided within the new building, and the distinct separation from Hickling Cottage itself and the size of the new building almost challenging that of the cottage. As this new proposal clearly demonstrates, all of these elements and many more, such as the lack of windows overlooking Hickling Cottage, were design features from the outset and are now the very arguments being used by Mr. Cushing to attempt to prove its suitability as an independent dwelling. He has, of course, also been resident in the new building for the past few months, in contravention of the extremely important caveat included in the planning consent. His illegal residence, bizarrely, is being used to support his current application. Significantly, in the new application, the building is no longer described as a replacement outbuilding, but has been rechristened an ancillary residential accommodation outbuilding, a clear attempt to influence.
I'm sorry, your 3 minutes are up. Are you happy to take questions?
Yes, very much so.
Right, anybody got any questions to Dr. Proud? Councillor Mitchell.
Could I ask how many members of the community support the viewpoint you're putting forward?
As you've heard, there were 13 oppositions to this. Nobody has ever supported any of Mr. Cushing's applications. There were 13 opposals to this. And I have to say that there were fewer than to the previous one because people have become slightly disillusioned with the whole process, which has been going on for a very long time. And it would seem to local residents that their feelings haven't necessarily been taken into account, their objective reasons as much as their feelings. The one thing that stopped us appealing to the previous consent was the caveat that it was not to be used as a separate residence. And only a few months after its completion, that's seeking to be overturned.
Are there any other questions to Dr. Proud? Thank you very much. We now have a supporter of the application, Miss Jill Baker. If you would like to come to the table, please. And you too have 3 minutes. Mitchell, could you turn your microphone off, please?
I'd just like to make the point that some of the 13 objections are actually from family members of the same family, so the situation isn't quite as bad as it is being made out to be. And the building actually exists, so it's not a new build and won't be having any effect on the conservation area. I'm aware that there's been a lot of neighbour objection to the proposal, and I'd like to note that how we got here via previous applications is not a relevant planning issue. Also, the approval of this proposal would not set a guaranteed precedent for future garden development, as each case is done on merit and would have to comply with the strict policy guidance, which means there are few, if any, other sites which could be developed in this way. I've produced a document that proves the proposal meets all of the Exeter Council criteria and laid it out in the format of the council checklist, so there are no policy reasons why the dwelling should not be allowed. In fact, Exeter is holding proposals to the highest standards in the surrounding area of Devon. The new small dwelling will create a better mix of accommodation in Tadderford, which has mainly larger units and would allow a resident who's lived locally for 20 years to stay in Tadderford. It will also free up a family home to re-enter the market. Anyone under 30, especially who lives in a flat, would think that the new dwelling was superb, and any question of the amenity space being inadequate is ill-informed on the general standard of one-bedroom properties. The house is effectively already being lived in as a dwelling, proving it is suitable, and because of the current ancillary use, the main dwelling is currently empty, so Mr. Cushing isn't flouting his current approval. The only part of the two buildings that are occupied is the annex. But with the current homeless figures, it's completely unacceptable to have a large family home uninhabited in that area, whilst only the annex is being lived in. As I've previously mentioned, there are no policy reasons for the application not to be approved. I don't know why Mr. Cushing didn't apply for it to be a dwelling originally, but it would have complied with all of the policy criteria had you done that. And in my opinion, the application should be approved.
Thank you, Ms Baker. You were just within time. Are there any questions? Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. As you're aware, I'm a board member, so there's a big interest, a greater interest in this particular issue. I just wonder, could I just ask first of all, you were not involved, I believe, in any of the other previous applications?
No, I wasn't.
No. But presumably you were aware of them and the details of them,
yeah,
etc. Just that, of course, it's based upon the approval for an extension stroke annex and is now converting, as we said, to a dwelling. You made the point about meeting all the criteria, all the standards, and I think as a board member having investigated, this is my greatest concern. Not whether it does, but how close to the standards it is and the marginality of the standards. The only figure I can find quoted in any of the public documents relates to the whole site being 495 square metres, and that includes the existing cottage and the new one, right? You said you've supplied details to the planning team.
Yeah, there's a planning statement which follows the council checklist at the back.
I
put the size of the floor area, the size of the garden.
Can we get to this then? Because the national standard for a two-storey minimum standard for a property is 58 square metres. Right? I was one of the councillors involved in the site inspection, and I say if I was a estate agent, I might politely call it bijou, sustainable. I don't know what I'd use, but it is on the small. You would agree it's on the small. Is this not
I mean,
how close do you say you are to that 58 square metres?
I think I measured it at 56, but I was going on the basis that it's a one-bedroom property, and guidance for one-bedroom properties, I'm pretty sure, is 55 or 56 square metres. It's in the unusual situation that it is a two-storey, one-bedroom property, which isn't normal. So comparing it to normal two-storey properties, which would normally be two-bedroom, is probably a
Can we just clarify, because this is an important point. I'm referring to a document given to me by the planning team here, which is from the Department of Communities and Local Government, March 15, saying technical housing standards. And the table on that refers at the smallest level to a two-storey dwelling, and the minimum figure quoted there for a two-storey dwelling is 58 metres, for a one-storey dwelling is 50 metres.
I hadn't seen that figure. That is, I don't think that's on their latest policy document where they've listed all of the policies.
That is the one I've been given.
Yeah.
So if I'm wrong or they're wrong, that's the one I've been supplied with.
There's a contradictory table in the policy document for one-bedroom
but what
properties.
you would agree that it is at the margins of the minimal
Sorry,
size.
Councillor Bialik. Councillor Mitchell, you are supposed to be asking a question.
Right, I was just trying to get clarification. Right, secondly, on the outside space, do you think you meet the minimum standards on the outside space?
Yes, we do, and the application is a proposal still, although most of it is already there. Technically, the garden, if we had to cut away a raised flower bed to create an extra metre of patio space, that could be done. But I think the documents refer to amenity space, and different people consider different gardens attractive.
So what would you quote as a size?
I've quoted, it's either 55 or 56 square metres. It met the criteria for a north-facing garden, but because the garden only has one story of house above it, it's actually lighter probably than most northern-facing gardens.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? No, thank you very much, Ms Baker. We will now open this to members. Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Chair. I was one of the other councillors who went on the site visit on this one. And the thing about this application is we are looking at an application for a building that already exists. So to actually start talking about whether new build would or wouldn't be approved, it has been approved and it's there.
So in terms of a consideration, that one's right out the window straight away. Secondly, sadly, I missed the mind reading module when I was at university. I haven't the foggiest idea what was in the applicant's mind when he first made the proposal, and I would venture to suggest that neither does Dr. Proud. So again, speculating about what people might or might have been thinking when the original application came in gets us nowhere, and I'm pretty certain it's not a planning consideration either. Coming on to some of the other objections about the loss of the garages, removed off-street parking for Hickling Cottage. Well, I don't think there's a councillor sitting around this table who hasn't got properties in their wards with garages and off-street parking, and the garages are absolutely full to the brim with play equipment, unused exercise kit, bicycles, or they've been converted to be part of the houses. People have garages and they choose what to do with them. Some people keep their cars in them, but frankly, frankly, it's a pretty minority use of them in sizable parts of the city. So what we're actually looking at is somewhere that, even on a dull December day, looked to me like a very pleasant place to live. It wasn't gloomy, and as I say, it was a gloomy day. There's plenty of light, there's outside space. There's a bedroom, facilities that could be a bedroom downstairs, which would make the living area upstairs significantly bigger than a lot of flats that I've seen. So frankly, I think we should approve this application, not least, as I said, right at the beginning, because it's already there.
Does anyone else wish to speak on this application? Councillor Henson, you've been remarkably quiet for 10 minutes.
I was, wasn't I? But I wasn't going to speak. But knowing Tatterford as I do, and being an old Exonian as I am, and a very old Exonian, it's the fact remains, it's not. I hear what Councillor Sutton, and she's dead right on what she says about what exists and what it doesn't exist. But you're sitting on an entrance to the only entrance to Tatterford with a very narrow. I had a big car once trying to get through there. I got through there, but I didn't manage. I didn't do it too many times. Let me put it that way. You've then got the delivery vans coming in and out of that, and you might say it's nothing to do with this particular planning, but it does. It does. It happens to be on the corner. Unless you pull in double lines on either side outside this house, you're in absolute. That whole estate could come to an absolute grinding stop, simply where it actually is. I'm not against what the person is trying to do, and she's quite right. It does exist, and I've been on the planning long enough to know exactly that. But I think we've got the other problem is we have a duty of care to the other people on that estate. And I'm worried at the fact that is there something in planning that this could be looked at in the point of the entrance where it is and the cottage next door, because as sure as eggs is eggs, that cottage is going to block the incoming vans or delivery vans and the cars eventually. It might not do it right away, but eventually it is. And I really am not going to support this purely on that point.
Councillor Harvey.
I must say I'm very surprised indeed that Councillor Henson isn't proposing the rolling back of the frontiers of the state, and is in fact proposing increasing the frontiers of the state with more yellow lines and more bits and pieces here and there and wherever. However, as many of my colleagues have said, it's there. It's there. Now, I went to the first meeting, the first planning, the first site visit. I think Councillor Supp was there at the time. Councillor Proud certainly was. And yes, fears about alterations in the future in order to make it a more suitable accommodation were expressed. But the fact of the matter is, as far as I can work out, no planning laws have been broken. There is, as the planning officers say, no sustainable reason to refuse. So there we go. End of story.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we say, it does exist. It is there. Nobody's talking about knocking it down. But what exists there is an annex with a workshop on the ground floor, and originally was an annex sunroom on the top. And on each occasion it's come before councillors, it's increased in size. Even though it moved back from the original boundary line, it's increased in square footage on each occasion. My question mark over this is the marginality between minimum standards on surface area of the building and on outside space. That if we have got minimum standards, property should meet those minimum standards. Because what's the use of having a standard if you then say, well, it doesn't matter if you're 5 or 6 inches or 2 feet or 5 meters under it, we're still going to let it go. And what concerns me also on a larger scale across Exeter is if we're getting how many others are going to come back with this sort of consideration again, having applied for one use and coming back for a self-contained use. And what we can do as planners in future to safeguard this situation arising again.
We cannot preempt what's going to happen in the future, Councillor Mitchell. Do you want to respond, Roger, before I ask Councillor Biout to speak?
I'm happy to do that, but I think Councillor Biout might be asking a question, so I can take it all at once.
It is. I'd like to clear that fog of this issue about the sizes of that little chat they were having just now. I just want to understand, does it or doesn't it meet the standards? And if it doesn't, why have you recommended it?
There's two standards here. There's the national space standards, which are about internal size of rooms, and there is the size of the outdoor amenity space, which is our own City Council guidance. So taking the first issue, which is the internal space standard, which is nationally prescribed, and we've adopted it as something that we promote here. The case officer, Lee Powell, and I did some work on this afternoon and measured it again. And we believe it does meet, only just, so it's very, very marginal, but it does meet the 58 square metres referred to in the national space standards for a 2-storey dwelling. So there's no question it meets the standard. You couldn't refuse it on those grounds and find the support on appeal. The second part, which is the outdoor amenity space, our own guidance, and it is guidance rather than hard and fast rules, talks about the size and the quality of the amenity space. Now, actually, this has got an unusually high quality area of amenity space for a small dwelling. It's very private, it's very light, and it doesn't meet our 55 square metre guideline, I don't think. It's probably a bit below that, but it does depend on how you measure it and what area you take into account. But certainly in terms of usable outdoor amenity space, I think it's below 55 square metres, but the area that is there is of a high standard. And I think an inspector coming to look at that would see that, would think, this isn't a reason to refuse this application. It's got adequate garden space for a dwelling of this size in this location of a decent quality. So our conclusion, looking at it as a whole, is that this provides appropriate level of amenity for the occupants.
Andy, you wanted to speak?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to add to Roger's comments there, and I think members may recall we reported an appeal decision, I think last month, which had a new dwelling where the outdoor amenity standards were slightly below our guidelines, but the inspector looked at it in the round and considered the benefits of the scheme outweighed that small disadvantage. And really, it's just a reminder that we all need to look at the scheme in the round, and this scheme has some very positive elements, not least the creation of an additional dwelling. And we are in a situation where we need additional housing and we don't have a 5-year housing supply. So that in itself carries some weight. And just because a particular element of the scheme doesn't meet a particular guideline is not reason in itself to withhold consent.
Thank you, Andy. Does anybody else wish to speak on this item? I propose to go to the vote on this. The recommendation from the officers is to approve it. Have I got a... right, Councillor Sutton will propose it, Councillor Branston will second it. And it does free up a house. It does mean that a single person has got a smaller space to live in, so can downsize and stay where they are. So will those in favour please show?
6 in favour.
Those against?
2 against.
Abstentions? That is carried. Thank you, members. Thank you all very much. That is the end of this meeting. We'll reconvene again next Monday.
Missing you already.
It's only 5 past.